Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Please pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Gordon Dimmack joins us today. We discuss the extradition hearing for Julian Assange, the failure of the mainstream media journalists, and more. John Pilger made a good use of the phrase journalism on trial, and as he noted, quote, should Julian Assange be extradited, it will not only be a crime of the British state, but of those quisling journalists who smeared and lied about him, unquote. Their actions and negligence are also undermining their own press freedoms and placing their own profession in jeopardy. Gordon has repeatedly made these same arguments with strong substantiation, and he's dedicated himself to both calling them out and making up for their failings. Gordon hosts a popular YouTube channel where he covers news, politics, war, and the horrific state of our corporate media. He broadcasts mostly from the Midlands in the UK, but also from on the ground at various events around the country, and his slogan is Make Orwell Fiction Again. We recorded this on February 25th, 2020. Gordon Dimmack is here, talking to us from the Midlands in the UK. Hello, Gordon. Thanks so much for coming back on the show.
It's always a pleasure, Joanne. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about the Julian Assange extradition hearings. You've done an extraordinary amount of work leading up to this, and I think that a lot of people know the basics, but just in case they don't, because the coverage here is pretty sparse and skewed, as you would expect, although independent media has really stepped up, and that's a good thing. But let's just start with, there is some confusion about where the hearings are, and if you could just sort of explain to us, take us there, the Belmarsh prison and these courthouses, and if you would, just from your own experience, just kind of take us there and explain where this is.
Belmarsh prison is sort of in, I would say, southwest London, just the other side of the river. It's a fortress. There is a prison within a prison in Belmarsh, and it's where the most hardened criminals. It's where we send the terrorists. It's where we send the white supremacists. It's where we send the worst kinds of offenders. It's where we send the worst of the worst. It's a grey, barren building, and just outside its walls, sort of within the perimeter fencing, is a separate building, and this is where the courtroom is. It's not big, it's not huge. It's got some for some historical context. It's where General Pinochet, it's where his trial was.
Oh,
Pinochet back then in the 80s.
Chile,
so
yeah.
It's the same court outside Belmarsh prison. He's in a situation. I read a report not long ago, actually, from a journalist who's there. Let me just find it, actually, so I can give that journalist the credit he deserves. It's Ben Quinn. And he said Julian Assange was handcuffed 11 times, stripped naked, and had paper confiscated in prison after his first day of his extradition hearing. So this is what he faces. John Pilger.
Wait, can we stop for a second?
Yeah.
Just during these hearings?
That was yesterday.
Just in one day?
Yeah, Julian Assange was handcuffed 11 times, stripped naked, and had paper confiscated in prison. That's day one. It was in the Guardian, actually. Guardian published that.
All right, that sounds ridiculous.
It does. I mean, John Pilger has talked at length about what he has to go through just to visit Julian. You get sniffed by sniffer dogs. You can only take one pair of glasses. So if you've got reading glasses and normal glasses, you can only take one pair. You get patted down twice. You have to go through many different security gates, and it's a very imposing and barren place to be. And he's been in there now since what was it, April last year?
April, yeah.
And that's been his home for the last what, 8, 9 months, coming up to a year. It's one of the most, I think. I mean, there was a documentary done, and what's his name, Ross Kemp went in there not long ago, and they put him in one of the coolers. One of the, I suppose they call it solitary confinement. Remember, Julian has been in solitary confinement 23 or 24 hours, although not in that room. And I remember him saying, "I wouldn't last an hour in here." That's Ross Kemp. This is meant to be the big, hard, tough guy of the documentary world, and it wouldn't last an hour. Julian's been in there for 9 months, so that's the situation that he's in.
Right. Now, the judge, I've been hearing stories about how, there are CIA lawyers in the courtroom, and that the prosecution, I guess the British prosecution is acting on behalf of the US, right? Because we're the ones who want the extradition. But there's talk about how the judge is like asking the prosecution's questions about, what, well, first of all, just tell us a little, if you would, about the judge and the lawyers.
Yeah, Judge. I mean, I haven't actually been in the court myself, so I can only go off what first-hand accounts. But I mean, Craig Murray, who's done a write-up, Your Man in the Public Gallery. He did a write-up of day one proceedings. You should go and check that out. He was talking beforehand about how the people at the back of the court, the CIA people, as he called them, they were almost directing proceedings. So, I mean, it's important to note, though, I mean, Judge Baraitser is obviously, I think, the Mark Kennard and Mark Curtis at Declassified UK, they have spoke at length of Judge Baraitser's links to files that have been in WikiLeaks. So, it's all of this will come out, I'm sure, over the coming weeks. It's going to be a long trial. It's not
right.
It's important to know that this first week we spoke off air. This first week is it's almost like the precursor. There's another. I read one report just the other day saying this trial is actually probably going to go into June, and then at the end of this trial, what happens then? Well, I mean, if, as people are suspecting, that the Magistrates Court, which is one of the lower courts, obviously in the UK, if they grant the extradition, expecting that to go ahead, then obviously there's an appeals process, etc., etc. So this could go on for a very, very long time.
Right. Yeah. And just for people who don't know, this week is part one of these hearings, but it's going to be separated into two parts, and then the rest of it's going to be held in May.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why they did that. Do you know why they did it that way?
It was a timing issue, I believe. I believe one of the prosecution lawyers wasn't available, so they had to split it. It was something like that. Don't quote me on it, but it was something similar.
I see. Okay. Yeah, and so we also heard that the courtroom is fairly small, particularly the amount of room for the public and for press in the actual courtroom. And then they have a separate room somewhere that's a press annex there where they can see what's going on basically on a TV screen. And there were a lot of problems with that, but those were worked out.
I believe the lawyer wouldn't speak into the microphone, so nobody in that annex could hear what he was saying. That's what I heard yesterday. But
yeah. And I'm trying to think of who it was that said they organized a petition, and they basically petitioned the judge to, make sure that all of the lawyers speak into the microphones, and then after the first hour, or after the first break, or after lunch or something, it did improve. But there are also a lot of people outside protesting, which, I mean, that's a good thing, but it also, the building is such that you can hear that noise inside the courtroom, and I guess it was at least in the press annex, and I guess it was interfering with the press's ability to hear things. And also Assange himself, he's in the back of the room behind like a glass partition or something like this.
Yeah, I believe it's bulletproof.
And
what I read. don't know how much he's behind some sort of protective glass. That's sure, for sure. But then I've been at a magistrate's court, and you do have a sort of like protective glass in front of you. I'm not sure that that's something that is unique to Belmarsh Prison. I've been in a magistrate's court and stood before a judge before for a non-payment of a fine, and I had a perspex glass in front of me, so that I wouldn't read too much into that.
Okay, got it. Now,
but it just goes to show. I read a report saying it was bulletproof glass. I mean, where they got that from. It's the hyperbole is something that we have to get away from, and this is one of the reasons why I got down there in the first place, Joanne, is to stop the nonsense that they were talking about in the press and try and get down there and say, no, these are the facts of the case. Let's get to the facts of the things and stop trying to spin titles and spin headlines and spin your words to fit whatever narrative you think is going to sell the most papers or get the most clicks on your website. And that's what I tried to do when I turned up there in my size 9s and told the press association to, no uncertain words, to start doing their job. When I first got down there, Joanne, I really did cause a stink outside that magistrate's court.
Oh, well, tell us more about that.
Well, when I got down there, there were quite a few media down there. There was
yes, I remember this.
There was quite a few media that were actually there. There wasn't many at all, and you could see that they really didn't want to be there, but they were there nonetheless. And the press association were there as well. And my girlfriend was filming a speech by somebody who'd come out of court, and so the guy from the press association was basically putting his hand in front of my girlfriend's camera, making sure that she could, because she had a good spot and he wanted to get in the way. It's a very it's sort of like, I'm with the press association, therefore I'm more important than you. I get the best spot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I went down there, and I that was unacceptable to me. These are the people who had led his persecution for 7 years. They had cheered on the persecution of this man with their smears and their lies, etc. And I had enough of it. And if you remember when I got down there at the first...
And we're talking about preliminary hearings.
Yeah,
now too, just so we...
This is going back to like June last year.
Gotcha.
Or June, July last year. And, Julian had sent me a letter, and I read it out outside Belmarsh Prison. I read his letter to me out. And somebody from the press association came up to me and said, Julian wrote you a letter. It's like, do your job. This is, journalism in jail right now. And you're asking me, you should be the first people to know if he sent me a letter. And this kid was like, he was 18, 19, fresh out of college. And I basically gave him what for. And all his friends in the media gathered around him. And I went down there to say to the media, you can't have it both ways. You've cheered on his persecution with lies for 7 years. You don't get to turn your ship now and try and report it the same way. And you certainly don't get to cheer on his persecution and psychological torture for nearly a decade. And then at the end of that decade say, oh, we oppose his extradition.
Yeah.
You've done it. You've facilitated it. You're responsible for it. You are responsible. If he does get extradited to the United States, you are basically responsible for killing your own profession. This is despicable behavior, and I wouldn't have it. And that's why I went down there, and that's why I, got so angry and so animated about things when I first started. And, I do, because it's despicable what the media have done to this man.
Yeah, and they think that they're immune or something, which is just very foolish.
What they don't realise, it's foolish. You're right, it's foolish. What they don't realise, Joanne, and do you remember the names of all the people who smeared Marilyn Monroe when she was alive? Do you know any of the journalists that were around smearing her and writing stories?
No, not one.
Have you ever heard of the scientists and the people who were saying that Albert Einstein is all nonsense and the media who were talking about him? Do you know all the people who were saying that William Shakespeare would never come to anything and never amount to anything? No. I'm sure if you really researched it, you could find out these people's names, but there won't be many of them in the bowels of history. The bowels of history will have forgotten these people. That's the fate that awaits our mainstream media and the people who have cheered on his persecution for 9 years. Because Julian Assange, in the decades and the centuries to come, he will be thought of in the same light as people like Marilyn Monroe, Albert Einstein, and William Shakespeare. And these people need to understand just how important his plight is, and just how history will remember this trial that goes on, for the next few months, because it really will. It will be, if we see justice prevail, it will be a huge, huge trial. If not, he'll be whisked off in the dark of the night to silence to America for his show trial, or worse, to be Epstein. But either way, history will remember it. This is an important time in history.
Yeah, it is and actually the only way that they may be remembered is if they are prosecuted and locked up too, because I do think that they're paving the way for their own demise. So I mean
Of
that
course,
remains to be seen, but
of course. Let's
there
remember.
is still an elite attitude that where they feel that, oh, okay, well, I am I cater to the national security state, therefore I'm safe. And that may be true for a little while, but I guess they forgot that there's a thing called a slippery slope.
Of course, and it's incrementalism is how you get there as well. It's little things that they've been doing day after day, and bending to the will of these people day after day. Oh, right, okay, well, I won't release that story. Oh, all right, okay, all right, well, I'll report on that story a little way. All right, okay, well, this is good for your business, then I'll report on this on a good way on this business, and you'll scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. This is the way corruption breeds. It's what has led to our fourth estate being the debacle that it is right now. You've got to understand. I say this to people all the time. The fourth estate, for those of you viewers or listeners, I'm sure most of you know what it is, but it's our media. They are the fourth estate. They are there to hold the other three estates of power, to account. And it's an important pillar of democracy. If you don't have it, what do you have? Well, you don't have democracy. You have a crony capitalism and an oligarchy like you have in the West right now. Something has to change.
Yeah, it definitely does. Let's the press coverage here is pretty sparse. Some people are calling it a blackout. I mean, it's not a total blackout, but we are completely engrossed in elections. If you go by cable news and the big headlines, elections and whatever scandal of the day. But in the UK, I've heard that the press coverage is not that great there either. But there is an interesting. I'm curious about the press coverage there and also the public sentiment and the comparisons that are being made between the woman who's now known to be U.S. intelligence who did a hit and run accident, killed a teenager, and the comparison between her uh, failed
Yeah,
or refused extradition uh, to the UK, and then the UK's extradition of Assange to the US.
yeah.
That's being talked about. I'm just wondering how much coverage that's getting over there, and it looks like Assange's defense is going to rely on that. The whole issue of too much influence, the United States, too much influence over the
Yeah.
UK. If you can just give us a sense of, what the buzz is there and what the press coverage is like, that'd be great too.
I've thought about the media silence quite often because it is really apparent that there is a blackout on it. You're right. And when they do report it, they, you know, they miss out huge chunks of information just simply because they don't know what they're talking about with it. I think see, here's the thing. For a decade, they've lied about it. I don't even know that they know what the truth is. And if you think about it, if I had smeared somebody for 7 years, and then all of a sudden I've got to defend him, it's like, well, all of a sudden my audience know that I've been bullshitting them for the last 7 years now.
Oh, right.
Do you see what I mean? So
Yeah.
they can't come out and say, oh, we've got to get behind Assange, because for 7 years they've been lying and smearing about them, and they'll show their ugly face, won't they? So
Yeah.
the only thing that they can do is just do what they're told and just be as silent as possible, because it's the media and it's the path of least resistance. That's what they take. This is why they're not the fourth estate. Now, with regards to at the answer coolers, I wouldn't say that they're relying on that, the defence. You know, you say that they're relying on the imbalance between the extradition. I would just say this is one part of it.
Okay.
And you know, because obviously this is the first week, and it's going to go into June. So there's going to be many different angles that they come at it, and there's going to be many twists and turns. Ansa Koulis, for those who don't know, she was a CIA analyst who's married to another CIA analyst. I believe she was retired, that's the wording. But she drove out of RAF Loughton, which I believe is in Northamptonshire or Nottinghamshire, don't quote me. And she forgot she was in the UK by the look of it, and drove on the right-hand side of the road. Obviously, we drive on the left, and there was a young guy coming in the opposite direction on his motorbike, drove straight head-on into a Volvo, and obviously killed him. She left the UK after being interviewed with police, and after telling police she wouldn't leave, and she's gone to the US. This is a case of, at the very minimum, driving without due care and attention and causing death without due care and attention, isn't it? And they've refused to send her back to even face any sort of questioning. You know, Harry Dunn, the young child, the young guy who was killed, his family obviously are facing no justice either. They're getting stonewalled. He even had to try and talk to Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, you know, in front of reporters, and had Dominic Raab pointing at him saying, "This is not on." Really, it's not on. He's grieving father. We're trying to get some answers from the Foreign Secretary who's stonewalling him. It's not on. It's disgusting, this treatment is. And of course, America won't send her back. And this is somebody who has been responsible for the death of a young boy from no due care and attention. I mean, obviously, I'm sure that she's mortified by it. I'm not saying for a second that that she did it intentionally, but you can see the difference here. Julian Assange has committed no crime. He's at the moment he's in that prison for no reason whatsoever. No crime is committed. The so-called crime of skipping bail, of which, let's remember, the reason he said, I sought asylum because they were going to use this to extradite me because they've got a sealed indictment. And guess what? When they dragged him out of that embassy, that's the first thing that they unsealed, was that unsealed indictment, which was his reason for going into asylum in the first place.
That's right.
So you know, this is highlighting. It really is highlighting how subservient the United Kingdom is to the powers that be in America, and it's maybe readdressing. It's certainly readdressing the public's opinion, because the public are obviously appalled. I mean, we've been watching things unfold not just over the last year or two, but since for 4 years now. Certainly that's when I woke up, and it's appalling what they're doing. It's appalling the treatment that this man has had compared to other people that really have caused. I mean, let's remember, he's not caused the loss of life anywhere. Julian Assange hasn't. I believe even his own lawyers in one court hearing over in America, even their own lawyers testified that, he didn't cause loss of life to anybody. He redacted tens of thousands, even though he had no manpower, 10,000 of their names. whatever crimes that he has committed, then the New York Times, the Guardian, the Washington Post, all of them have committed them as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Like I say, they cheered on in their collective persecution on him by doing the power of the bees bidding. They cheered on the death of their own profession. I have got nothing but disdain for them.
I agree with you.
You mentioned that you asked public opinion. Public opinion is really increasing. I've seen it on the ground. I've tried to rally as much support as I possibly could over the last since Julian wrote to me back in May, it's got more and more as time has gone on, and obviously now the court proceedings, these need to play out, and it's in their hands. But we need to remember this, and it's something that I really want to make a point of. Julian's his fate does not lie in that courtroom. His fate lies in the courtroom of global public opinion. That's where it lies. If the global public stand up as one voice and say, no, this is not on, you cannot reach in and grab this man for proving that you're all lying war criminals. You can't do it. And we can see that that's exactly what you're doing. And why do we know that that's exactly what you're doing? Because that's the first thing that they said yesterday when the trial started.
That's right.
This is not for war crimes. He's like, come on. You're lying. You are all liars. You're just lying to us. And we know you're lying because it's the first thing out of your mouth. We know that this is not just for the crimes that he has exposed over the years, but for the crimes and the criminal activity and the truths that the public deserve to know right now. That's why you are trying to silence journalism here. You are silencing the fourth estate. And that's what it's about. And that's why this trial needs to run its course and go on for the months. I'm so glad, because there was word last year that it was going to be over and done with within a few days. And I think the public opinion changed that, and the people, writing to MPs, etc. I had many of my viewers on my show writing to their MPs to try and get their MPs to support an early day motion that Chris Williamson put forward. And I've got probably 25, 30 letters from MPs in the UK to their constituents. It's disgusting. They didn't know what was going on here. I would say 80, 90% of them from the Labour MPs that replied to their own constituents, and this is meant to be the people who were standing up for Julian Assange, remember, they were saying that he faces rape charges in Sweden. Now, you and I both know there was never any charges, and this was all a ruse to get him into custody so they could get him into prison and get their hands on him. But even the politicians don't know. So it's important that we hold their feet to the fire as well with this, because let's remember, they've done nothing for nearly a decade, haven't they, Joanne?
Yeah, that's right.
They've cheered this on for nearly a decade. They have been complicit in it. And now some of them are parachuting in at the end, trying to say, oh, no, we oppose this. Hold on a minute. Why is it, if you oppose it, Labour politicians, I've got letters from Labour politicians saying this is about rape in Sweden. Why is it that your own politicians are giving your constituents misinformation and lies? Why is it? I got letters from the Conservative politicians, and they were, honestly, you couldn't pick fault with them as much.
Yeah, so, it's interesting how that happens sometimes. Same thing here.
We cannot let these politicians jump in at the end of this after doing nothing while this man was collectively persecuted by democratic states and psychologically tortured by them. And that's not my words, that's the words of a United Nations specialist in torture, Niels Melzer.
That's right.
They stood by and done nothing. Well, the United Kingdom didn't even open an investigation into his treatment, which is the very very minimum that they are obliged to do by the United Nations. And if we were a non-United Nations country applying to get in the United Nations, we would be refused on the basis that we haven't opened an investigation.
Allowing torture, right? Yeah.
Stood there and done nothing. So we need to make sure that they cannot jump in at the end and do some political point scoring because they think they're suddenly going to change their tune, jump on board and get some votes. Let's remember those politicians that signed that letter saying that they think he should go to Sweden. Let's remember them. There were a lot of Labour MPs in that, I remember. These politicians, they've been asleep at the wheel.
Well, I guess one silver lining is the fact that they even feel that they have to step in at the last minute. But yeah, certainly there has to be accountability. They have to be held accountable at whatever point in time it makes most sense to do that. And I understand that Corbyn has been pretty good on this, but even Boris was asked a question, was it last week or something? And he said something that was vaguely encouraging about it. Is that, I only, I didn't pay too much attention. I just caught it while I was skimming an article.
It's like anything. It's like I say, this case will be won in the court of public opinion.
Right.
They will do what we decide. That's basically it. They will end up doing what we make sure that they do. If we make a song and dance about it, you know what? We might have a great result here and a really hopeful future. If not, democracy will die.
Well, so the big points are then, just to wrap up, the rape narrative is false. There were never any charges.
There's a lady that I met at the Assange public hearings, public meetings, called Lisa Longstaff, and she's from Women Against Rape. She's the spokesperson for a Women Against Rape group. And she explains, her speeches are on my channel, you should go check them out. And she explains how this saying that this is rape and attaching Julian Assange to a case of rape and making this about rape in the media does a disservice to real rape victims. If you actually look at the facts of this case, it's not rape. Actually, what it is consensual sex without a condom. And pardon my French, Joanne, in the United Kingdom, that's known as fucking. So if you actually look, and let's remember, neither of these girls accused him of rape. Neither of these girls wanted him to be arrested. This is the collective persecution of powerful democratic institutions. And this is something that people need to understand. This is not about rape. And making this case about rape for years, like the media have, has been a disservice to rape, in the same way as trying to say that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic does a real disservice to real anti-Semitism. Right. And it's the media here who need to be held accountable. It's really weird because journalism is in jail right now, but it's not really the right kind of journalism. It's the good kind of journalism in jail. The people that should be in jail are the people who have led his public persecution and cheered on his psychological torture for the last decade. They are the people that should be in jail. Not
right. And so
they should be on trial right now.
The rape narrative really stuck. So it benefits you to free people to understand what the real issues were there. There was a complaint, but it was not a rape complaint. There were never any charges. There was some corruption in the Swedish prosecution offices. So that's the one thing. The other big important narrative here that I can see is that people are making the point that, hold on a second, the person who published information about war crimes is being tortured, held in prison, and being extradited, but the war criminals themselves are walking free. Yeah. This narrative really hit home. We know that because immediately this is what the powers that be pushed back against on the first day of the trial. And I think the third narrative that is catching on in the UK, most people here in the US don't know about it, is the Anne Sekulis narrative that, hey, wait a minute, we want to extradite someone who killed one of our citizens, and the U.S. refuses to do it, but the U.S. demands that Assange be extradited from the UK, and we're just bending over and not fighting it and doing it. So those are sort of three big
Yeah.
narratives that people should be familiar with and in conversation be able to push back on
The irony
or utilized. Yeah.
the irony of that is, I mean, and I understand that people, there's two schools of thought on the Anti-Securus incident, by the way. There's a school of thought that we shouldn't actually draw comparisons between the Assange case and that one, because let's remember Assange he hasn't committed a crime in this country. You know?
Okay, yeah.
So you know, there's a school of thought that says we shouldn't, because then you're associating the two. But I think the point to make is, look, yeah, listen, you know, this person has killed somebody and they won't extradite him, whereas this other person hasn't been responsible for any crime like that, or any crime at all in this country. He's not on trial for any crime he's committed in this country. So you could draw the comparison there, but I think the irony is not lost on me, Joanne, in that RAF Bluffton is allegedly, I hear, one of these spy bases that the Five Eyes use to collect and store information on everybody, the very information that people like Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have been exposing to the public.
Right. Now I need to let you go because you have another interview coming up, but I just want to say that people like Gordon going on site, live streaming and reporting facts and details for us that we find it very difficult to get, and other journalists that are headed over there from the U.S. You know, this is independent media. They don't have a big corporate backer. This is basically listener supported. That includes their travel costs. We need to support them. We need to send them money, basically, and we need to support them by retweeting them. So Gordon, tell everybody what's the best way to support you, what's the best way to find your work, and just lay out those details real quick.
Yeah, with regards to the Assange trials going forward, you know, what I will say to these people is switch off the mainstream media, because you're not going to get the real, you know, information and the real important information from them. The guys from America coming over, the Action for Assange crew, Taylor Hudak is over here. She's doing pieces to camera from site. Should go and follow her on Twitter and the Action for Assange crew, and they'll probably be restreaming some stuff through my channel. I can't be there, you see, down in Belmarsh this week. So that's where you're going to get all the information, and obviously it's cost a fortune for them to come over. They're entirely funded by people as well. So if you can spare anything, please support them, the Action for Assange crew, and I know Tariq Haddad. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry, Tariq, if I get it wrong. He's working with them as well. Tariq is the person who from Newsweek who well, he quit because of the rubbish surrounding the Syria situation. So he's got, you know, they all need as much support as possible. With regards to me, at Gordon Dimmack on Twitter, you can go to gordondimmack.com and Gordon Dimmack on YouTube. And I'm going to be this year documenting. I'm going to document this year. I'm going to try and speak to people and interview people and do what you do. But person to person, Joanne, I really think it's important that we get the views of you know, professors and learned people, rather than the people that they are getting the views from in the media at the moment. Because let's face it, who are they? They're the war criminals, Joanne. They're the people who are they got away with all their crimes. You know, if you want an update on Brexit from the BBC, who do they go to? They go to Tony Blair. You know, if you want an update in the United States of what happened, I don't know, during the 2008 Obama eras or whatever, what happens? They go to Brennan, they go to Clapper, they go to these people who have lied constantly. It really is. It's insidious, and it's and really, I am so looking forward to the day where our mainstream media, our legacy media, our old media, our whatever you call it, I'm looking forward to their judgment day, because I'm going to set up a picnic table and a chair and sit there and watch as they get put on trial, because I think it's sick what they have done over the last 20 to 30 years. They have systematically killed their own profession by taking the path of least resistance and basically being happy in the fact that they got money for pushing propaganda.
Yeah, it's hard to measure how much damage they've done. but we know that it's enormous. And so, follow Gordon. Gordon has a whole network of people who he's tapped into and he amplifies. And I'll put some links in the show notes. And thank you so much, Gordon. It was great to talk with you, and I hope we'll talk to you again soon.
It's a pleasure, Joanne. Thanks very much, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Gordon Dimmack. Follow him on Twitter at Gordon Dimmack. Subscribe to his YouTube channel, and find and support his work on his website, gordondimmack.com. Around the Empire podcast, independent media, and your support's really important. Please pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Lots of ways to find and listen to this podcast. Look on any mobile podcast app, on the website, aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. And if you are listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.